Imagine being 5 years old. Most kids at that age are trying to tie their shoes without falling over or arguing about who gets the last cookie. But Michael Jackson? He was already performing on stage in front of crowds. Not school crowds, real crowds. Adults screaming, music blasting, spotlights everywhere. And somehow, the little kid in the middle of it all was the best performer on stage. That kid would grow up to become the king of pop. But the story didn't start in a palace. It started in a small house in Gary, Indiana. Hey friends, welcome back to our another English shadowing practice. I'm Nathan with you. Just a quick reminder, listening is great, but repeating out loud is where the real improvement comes from. So feel free to pause, take your time, and say each sentence after me. Everything here is kept short and clear, so it's easier to shadow along. Don't stress about being perfect. Progress comes from repetition, not perfection. So let's start. Michael Joseph Jackson was born on August 29, 1958. He was the 8th of 10 children in the Jackson family. The house they grew up in was tiny for that many people. Imagine 10 kids in one house. At that point, the bathroom schedule alone probably needed a manager. Michael's father, Joe Jackson, worked long hours at a steel mill. But Joe had a bigger dream. He wanted his kids to become musicians. And Joe was not exactly a gentle music teacher. Let's just say his coaching style was closer to military drill instructor than supportive soccer dad. The kids practiced constantly. If they messed up a dance move or a note, Joe made sure they knew about it, sometimes harshly. Years later, Michael would talk about how strict those rehearsals were and how scared he often felt of disappointing his father. But those endless rehearsals did something else too. They made the Jackson kids incredibly good. The group started with Michael's older brothers, Jackie, Tito, and Jermaine. They called themselves the Jackson Brothers at first. Then, one day, Joe noticed something interesting. Little Michael, the quiet kid, had a voice that sounded unbelievable. High, smooth, and full of emotion. And when he danced, he moved like someone who had been performing his entire life. Soon Michael and his brother Marlon joined the group. The name changed to the Jackson 5. And suddenly, the kid who had barely started elementary school was the lead singer of a family band. At first, they performed in small talent shows and local clubs around Gary and Chicago. But here's the wild part. A lot of those clubs were adult nightclubs. Picture a tiny 8-year-old kid singing soul music to rooms full of grown adults drinking cocktails. It sounds insane now, but the crowd loved him. Michael had something you can't really teach: stage presence. Even at that age, he knew how to work a crowd. He'd spin, he'd dance, he'd hit these big emotional notes that made people stare like, wait, how is that coming out of a kid? By the late 1960s, word about the Jackson 5 started spreading fast. Talent shows turned into bigger performances. Bigger performances turned into auditions. And then, one audition changed everything. The group signed with Motown Records, the legendary label run by Berry Gordy. Motown already had huge stars. But once the Jackson 5 arrived, something special happened. Their first 4 singles went straight to #1. That had never happened before for a new group. Songs like I Want You Back, ABC, and I'll Be There exploded everywhere. And right in the center of it all was a kid with a giant smile and an even bigger voice. Michael Jackson was barely 10 years old, and he was already one of the most famous children in America. But fame that early comes with a price. While other kids were riding bikes and playing video games, Michael was touring the world, rehearsing constantly, and living inside the music industry. The world saw a superstar kid, but behind the scenes, he was still just a child, trying to figure out life. And as the years went on, that pressure would shape everything about him. Because the little kid from Gary, Indiana, wasn't just going to be a pop star. He was about to become something much bigger. So by the early 1970s, Michael Jackson was already famous. Most teenagers are figuring out homework, awkward school dances, and whether their haircut looks terrible in photos. Michael? He was touring the world, performing on television, and selling millions of records. But there was a problem. Actually, a big one. The Jackson 5 were stars, but they didn't control their own music. The Motown system worked like a machine. Writers wrote the songs, producers ran the sessions, and artists mostly followed instructions. It created great hits, but Michael was starting to feel boxed in, and by the late 1970s, he was ready to prove he could do more. So when the Jackson family left Motown and signed with Epic Records, things began to change. Michael finally had more creative freedom, and that freedom led to one of the most important partnerships in music history. A producer named Quincy Jones. They first worked together on the soundtrack for the movie The Wiz in 1978. The movie itself didn't exactly become a cinematic masterpiece. Let's just say critics were not throwing confetti, but the collaboration between Michael and Quincy turned out to be magic. Quincy saw something special in Michael. Not just a singer, a perfectionist, someone obsessed with every tiny detail of music. The result was an album called Off the Wall, released in 1979, and it completely changed Michael Jackson's career. The album mixed pop, disco, funk, and soul in a way that felt fresh and exciting. Songs like Don't Stop Till You Get Enough and Rock With You were everywhere. Clubs, radios, car stereos. Basically, if you turn on music anywhere in 1979, Michael Jackson was probably singing. The album sold over 20 million copies. But here's the interesting thing. Michael wasn't satisfied. Most artists would celebrate selling millions of records and take a vacation somewhere tropical. Michael saw it differently. He felt the music industry still didn't fully respect him as an artist. In fact, when the Grammys came around, Off the Wall only won one major award. To Michael, that felt like a huge disappointment. So he made a quiet promise to himself. Next time, he was going to create something so big the world couldn't ignore it. And that's when work began on an album that would completely reshape pop music. In 1982, Michael Jackson released Thriller. Now, it's hard to explain just how massive this album became. Imagine every song on an album becoming a hit. Not one, not two, 7, Billie Jean, Beat It, Thriller. Each one had its own identity, its own sound, its own moment. But Michael didn't just change music, he changed music videos. At the time, music videos were usually simple. A band standing around playing instruments while someone awkwardly lip-synced. Michael turned them into mini-movies. Billie Jean introduced his famous moonwalk on national television during the Motown 25 special in 1983. That moment basically broke the internet, except the internet didn't exist yet. People literally ran outside telling neighbors to turn on their TVs. Then came the Thriller music video, a 14-minute horror short film with zombies, choreography, and a full storyline. It cost around $500,000 to produce, which, at the time, sounded absolutely insane for a music video. But it worked. Thriller became the best-selling album in music history, eventually selling over 70 million copies worldwide. Michael Jackson wasn't just a pop star anymore. He was becoming something bigger, a cultural phenomenon, the king of pop. But the higher someone rises, the more intense the spotlight becomes. And for Michael Jackson, the spotlight was about to get brighter and more complicated than anyone could have imagined. By the mid-1980s, Michael Jackson wasn't just famous. He was everywhere. His music was on the radio every hour, his videos dominated MTV, and his dance moves were being copied in school hallways, living rooms, and probably a few weddings where someone thought they could moonwalk and absolutely could not. After the historic success of Thriller, the pressure was enormous. People were wondering one thing: how do you follow the biggest album in history? Michael's answer came in 1987 with a new album called Bad. Now, originally, the plan was for Bad to be a massive 30-song project. Michael had written a ton of material, and in typical Michael fashion, he wanted everything perfect. Producer Quincy Jones eventually stepped in and basically said, "Michael, we need to calm down a little." So they narrowed it down. Even after trimming the list, Bad still became one of the most successful albums ever made. Songs like Bad, Smooth Criminal, Man in the Mirror, and The Way You Make Me Feel became global hits. And again, the music videos pushed things even further. The Bad video, directed by Martin Scorsese, looked like a short crime movie. The Smooth Criminal video introduced that famous anti-gravity lean, where Michael and his dancers leaned forward at an angle that looked physically impossible. People everywhere tried to copy it. Most of them just ended up almost falling over. But behind the scenes, Michael's life was becoming more complicated. Fame had followed him since childhood, but now the scale was something completely different. Wherever he went, crowds gathered instantly. Fans screamed. Reporters chased him. Photographers followed him everywhere. Imagine trying to buy groceries while 50 people are taking pictures of you. Eventually, Michael started creating his own world away from the chaos. In 1988, he bought a massive property in California and turned it into something that looked more like a theme park than a house. He called it Neverland Ranch. The place had amusement park rides, a zoo, movie theaters, and huge gardens. It looked like something out of a fairy tale. For Michael, Neverland represented something very personal. He often said that because he spent his childhood performing and working, he felt like he never really got to be a kid. Neverland was his attempt to recreate that lost childhood. He invited sick children, families, and charity groups to visit and enjoy the park. Many people who went there described it as magical. But as Michael became more mysterious and private, the media started paying closer attention to every detail of his life. And the tabloids, well, they had a field day. Stories about his appearance began spreading everywhere. His skin was getting lighter. His nose looked different. People speculated constantly. Michael explained that he had a skin condition called vitiligo, which causes patches of skin to lose pigment. Over time, doctors used treatments to even out the color of his skin. But rumors traveled faster than explanations. Suddenly, every small change in his appearance became a headline. And then there were the bizarre stories. One famous rumor claimed that Michael slept in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber to stay young forever. Another said he tried to buy the bones of the Elephant Man, Many of those stories were exaggerated or completely false, but they spread around the world anyway. Michael Jackson was becoming less like a normal person in the public eye and more like a mystery. At the same time, his fame kept growing. His concerts sold out stadiums across the planet. Millions of fans saw him not just as a singer, but as a symbol of music itself. But the more the world watched him, the harder it became for Michael to live a normal life. And soon, the attention around him would shift from curiosity to something much darker. By the early 1990s, Michael Jackson had already done something almost impossible. He had dominated music for more than a decade. Most artists get one huge moment, maybe one legendary album. Michael had already had several. But the 1990s brought a different kind of attention, and not the kind any artist wants. In 1991, Michael released another big album called Dangerous. This project showed a new side of his music, mixing pop with a harder, more modern sound that leaned into hip-hop and new jack swing. Songs like Black or White, Remember the Time, and Heal the World became massive hits. The Black or White video premiered on television to an audience of hundreds of millions of people worldwide. That kind of global attention was normal for Michael by then. But behind the music, his life was getting increasingly complicated. In 1993, allegations of child abuse were made against him for the first time. The case exploded across headlines around the world. News channels covered it constantly, and suddenly, Michael Jackson was no longer just a pop icon in the media, he was the center of a global controversy. Michael strongly denied the accusations. The case was eventually settled out of court, but the damage to his public image was huge. For the first time in his career, the spotlight that had once celebrated him now followed him with suspicion. And unfortunately, that wouldn't be the last time. Despite everything happening around him, Michael continued making music. In 1995, he released his story, Past, Present, and Future, a massive double album. One disc contained his greatest hits, while the other included new songs that directly addressed the criticism and pressure he was feeling. Tracks like Scream, They Don't Care About Us, and Earth Song were emotional and intense. You could hear the frustration in his voice. It sounded like a man fighting against the entire world watching him. His concerts during this period were still enormous. Stadiums across Europe and Asia filled with fans who still saw him as the king of pop. But by the early 2000s, things were starting to slow down. In 2001, he released Invincible, his final studio album during his lifetime. The album had strong moments, but the music industry had changed. New artists and new sounds were dominating the charts. At the same time, more legal battles and personal struggles kept pulling Michael back into headlines. In 2005, he went through a major criminal trial over new accusations. After months in court, he was found not guilty on all charges. Even though he was cleared legally, the stress of the trial and years of constant media pressure had clearly taken a toll. Michael became more private. He spent time living in different countries and staying away from the spotlight. Then, in 2009, something surprising happened. Michael announced a huge comeback. A series of concerts in London called This Is It. The plan was for 10 shows, but the demand was so overwhelming that the number quickly expanded to 50 concerts. Fans around the world were excited. It felt like Michael Jackson was finally returning to the stage in a big way. Rehearsals began in Los Angeles, and people who saw the early practice footage said something amazing. Even at 50 years old, Michael could still dance, still perform. still command a stage like almost nobody else. But the comeback never happened. On June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson died suddenly at the age of 50 due to cardiac arrest caused by an overdose of prescription medication. The news spread across the world in minutes. Fans gathered outside hospitals, radio stations, and music stores. Tributes appeared everywhere. Even people who weren't huge fans realized something huge had just happened. The biggest pop star in history was gone. But the music didn't disappear. Songs like Billie Jean, Thriller, Beat It, and Man in the Mirror still play everywhere on radios, streaming platforms, movies, and dance floors. New artists still study his performances. Dancers still try to copy his moves. And millions of people still remember the kid from Gary, Indiana, who stepped onto a stage and somehow changed pop music forever. That's the legacy of Michael Jackson, the king of pop. All right. If you made it through this shadowing session today, that already says something about your discipline. This repetition and consistency combination might look boring on paper, but it is one of the most powerful ways to build fluent, natural English. Keep showing up like this, and your brain will slowly adapt. Trust the process. If this helped even a little, consider liking the video or subscribing. It lets me know these sessions are actually making a difference. We'll catch up again soon. Take care till then.